wanted to do for you today was use the Autumn Pumpkins embossing folder. It's so pretty. And obviously it's that right time of year, isn't it? And since it's been released, we've had our 3 releases of inks actually. I think this was last year. When this was released, we didn't have any inks released, any of Lisa's inks released. So it's really nice just to come on and use Lisa's inks for a completely different embossing folder, something you haven't seen before. I've got 2 backgrounds. You'll notice the pumpkins are missing from here. It's because I've made them and I've misplaced them again somewhere. It's been one of those mornings, trust me. But yeah, so we'll get going as soon as. Right, I'll just lift this one up and show you, because there's probably more to it than meets the eye when sitting down on the desk there. It's actually an Aperture card. So I've used the Acetate in the background, and if I can tilt that, let me just see. Ah, yeah, if I can tilt that, you can see that I've actually embossed the Acetate and before I've put that into the Aperture there. So that's with the basket weave embossing folder. And I thought that just sits really nicely. It's like Harvest Festival theme, baskets, pumpkins. That just looks really nice. So that's one background. And then I've got a nice ombre effect that I created with the inks for the background here. So I'll show you how to do that, and obviously I'll stencil the pumpkins for you. So I'll just go through the sets quickly. I will list these when I get the video sorted and put onto YouTube for you. So we have the autumn set. So it's a set of stencils and an embossing folder. It's a 5x7 embossing folder. But when you actually die cut the pumpkins out, you can actually put this on any shape cards, but the embossing folder itself is a 5x7 shape. So if you wanted to emboss the front of one of your card blanks, which is 5x7 straight away, then that would be ideal for that. Obviously we get the die for that as well. We have the stencils, so I'll go through the stenciling with those for you in a second. The weave, the basket weave embossing, which is in the background there on the Acetate, is this embossing folder here. It's one of the very first originals, the 3D embossing folder. So there's no stencils, no die involved with this, but it's purely a decorative embossing folder, which is so underrated. You forget how useful just these embossing folders are, so that's really lovely. And also what I wanted to do is just use this SLIMLINE Festive Check frame. It's a die set. It's a festive set, as you can see by the red border around the outside, but obviously it doesn't always have to be used for Christmas. Yes, it does come with some holly berries and holly leaves as well, but you don't have to use them. It's just a really nice background to use. So all of the die cut in here, all of the frames and the mats and layers have been created with this set. Then in the back of this card, which say they're 2 DL cards, if I can hold this up for you, if you imagine that there would be the pumpkin sitting on the front, or actually it's quite a nice card sitting there by itself actually. So the pumpkins would sit on the front like that. If you look at the card blank itself in the background here, instead of using a matte and layer, I've actually embossed the front of the card blank, and for that I've used the SLIMLINE collection embossing folder, the Falling Leaves. Again, this is available on the website, and there are coordinating dies to go with this one. So if you wanted to cut out and use any one of these leaves, we do have some dies with this one as well, so that's a really lovely set to have. And again, this can be used all year round, and it's a really nice design just to sit in the background of any card, particularly these autumn cards. So I've used a mixture of colours from the different releases actually, quite a few from the 3rd release of inks. You can see them, yeah. So we have the Straw Hat, Burnt Ochre, Pina Colada, Woodland Moss, which is from the 1st collection, Loganberry from the 3rd, Rusty Nails, which I think might be from the 2nd, I can't remember, but it's a lovely collection now, and it's spread across all the 3 releases that we've had, we've got pretty much a colour for every situation. So let's get stenciling. So I'm going to start off with stencil number 1 with the straw hat. So it's a really nice pale base to actually get going with these pumpkins. Now obviously you can choose whichever colour you like for this. I'm going to go for the paler style of pumpkin, but you can go bright orange. I know you can get some pumpkins that are purple as well, and green and all sorts. So this really is something that you can adjust to suit and whatever colour takes your fancy. And why not go a bit bold, you know, try a slightly different colour. You can either go for the yellows and highlight in orange. Okay, so I'm going to put this really nice base down. This straw hat colour is a really new colour. It's from the 3rd release, and it's such a useful neutral colour that we can really build on top of. Really nice colour to work on top of. So I should say, actually, in this set we've actually got 9 stencils. So it's quite a few, so we've got quite a lot going on this design, but it's such an easy one to use. Okay, so we have a leaves on here, so I'm going to go for my trusted Woodland moss for the leaves. I'll go on quite dark with these ones. This is such a perfect colour for autumn, isn't it? Woodland moss. I mean, even the name suggests nice seasonal autumn colours, doesn't it, really? So, and what I'm going to do before I finish with the woodland moss, I'm just going to pick out the stalks of the pumpkins. I didn't pick them out enough on this one here. Can you see that there? Let's bring that in there, shall I? There we are. I have to readjust things now. I've moved the camera, but yeah, I didn't actually highlight the stalks well enough on this one here, so I'm just going to do that now with the green. I'll put that in there, so we do that first. Now we can start highlighting the pumpkins, and I'm going to use burnt ochre, and for this I'm really concentrating on the burnt ochre. Although it looks brown, it really can give a nice sort of orangey feel if you use it in that sort of way. So that's the colour that I'm using on top of straw hat to highlight these pumpkins. Now I'm going to go on really pale to start with, just to add some sort of shadowing, and I'm just working at the top of the pumpkins and also at the base. And I'll just do that first, and then I'll have a quick look just to see where I am with that colour and just how much of the pumpkins are highlighted, and then I shall just go back in and start working that colour back in again. That's how I generally like to stencil with Lisa Stencils. I always build up the colour from light to dark. It tends to give me a nice amount of dimension on the image that I'm working on. So I'm just going to pop that up and just see how that's looking. So on the outside we want that slightly darker, and we want to have the highlights in the centre, but obviously we want to have the detail of the pumpkin segments there. So without putting more ink on, I'm just going to work over those sections. So we are putting the ink down. We'll see that once I move the stencil away, but it's not making a huge impact. So I'm going to come in with more ink now. I'm going to spread the ink along the mylar at the base, and then I'm going to flick that up, and that's how I managed to get a really nice graduation effect of colour, which then gives me the element of shading and I suppose sort of dimension onto the images that I'm stenciling. I use the stencil, the mylar, the plastic around there, as a tool. It's not just sort of blank space, and I really use that as a palette, and I use that to my advantage. Now the larger pumpkin is sitting around here, so I want to create the same effect as I go around this way. So I'm going to put a lot of ink along the base and just flick that in, and we end up with a nice dark line there. And also the same this section here. So we end up with shadows, I suppose, as it were. So we really stencil that in. And we take that away, and you can see that really coming together. So we come in stencil number 3, so we've got more leaves. I'll change my stencil brush. Woodland moss again, and I should go a little bit lighter this time. So we have 2 shades of green going on. Again, that just gives the element of like 3D nature of this image. And it's so easy to do with just one ink. I mean, I am just using one colour for the leaves, but it really depends on the amount of ink that you put in at a time. So you can see this layer of woodland moss leaves are a lot lighter, but obviously they'll still be quite relevant to the leaves behind them, sharing the same shade. I'm just going to flick a little bit of ink in the base of the leaves just to add a little bit of two-tone, in much the same way as I created the shading at the bottom or around the outside of the pumpkins there. So if you can see that, we have quite a dark base to the leaves. I don't need to blend it in because as the ink dries, that sort of line does soften. So if that's something that you're worried about, then don't worry too much, because the ink always looks darker when it's wet. So we have that going on. And now we've got the sunflowers. We can see here. So the sunflowers, I want a slightly different shade of yellow, of course, so just to make them stand out. So I'm using the Pina Colada. Again, I'm just putting this on really lightly as a base initially. And when you do this really lightly, this tones down from the really bright neon yellow, which is stunning. It tones down to a real nice lemon colour, which is, again, a really nice base to build the colour up onto and create dimension. So we've got a really nice base of lemon going on there. Yeah, we can see. And now, while I'm here, I'm just going to work around the outside and just give the tips of all of these sunflowers a real brighter yellow, but I'm only working onto the tips here. So what that looks like, it does look like a real sun on the page there. They are really glowing, but we have the nice pale centres going on. So you can see that shading's really nice. And then we come in with the detail for the flowers on top there. So that's why you always work with when you're creating one of your images, the first stencil is usually the widest, the most open stencil, which is where you put in the palest of colours, because you will be adding detail on top of that. So I'm going to go back to my burnt ochre. So I'm going to put an orange tinge on top of these. Now I'm not going to pick up any more ink at this stage. I'm just going to work with what I've got on my brush and work from the centre of the sunflowers outwards, and just on the centre where there's a good amount of mylar that you're not touching the cardstock, just start working in central, circular motions, and that will eventually work off from the centre of the mylar onto the petals. Now that is going to give me a really subtle orangey colour in the background, like so. So we're on stencil number 6. So we can see here that we're going to start adding some detail to the leaves. Now I'm going to continue using the burnt ochre. With the autumn theme, obviously leaves are going to start changing colour, so having orangey brown sitting on top of the Woodland moss is perfect for this. So we can do that on all of our areas there. And then this little central area that we need to stencil through is again going onto the sunflowers, so I can also use the burnt ochre onto that, but a lot paler, because that's sitting and giving the detail to them central sunflowers. We can see the detail sitting on the leaves there. So this is a really lovely stencil. We can start introducing the bow that we have sitting here, and also we can finish off the detail on the leaves. So I'm going to use the burnt ochre and just work that through the leaves, so we have the detail on those. I shall put different amounts of ink through each of the leaf details. You can put the same intensity of colour all the way round if you wanted to, but I think if you just add it at different intensities in different areas, especially on things like leaves and foliage, which are never uniform, are they? I think it just gives a real more natural look to what you're doing. Before we change colour and we will start working on the bow. So I'm just going to give my brush a quick wipe there. The bow, yes. So with the bow, what I did do actually, I started off with the burnt ochre, and I'm just going to go really gently all the way around the outside. I want this bow to really stand out. I'm keeping it all colour toned, so it's all sort of perfectly fitting into the theme, but then I don't want it to end up being the same colour as the pumpkins. We want it to be distinctive, really, don't we? So I'm just putting the base colour all over, so we have a real nice rustic Hessian sort of brown background there. And just before I finish with that, again, I'm going to come in and just shade all around the outside, so we have a bit more intensity of colour just around the outside of the bow. And I think again that just gives us an extra bit of dimension, and I'll do that in exactly the same way as I have done before. I put the ink on the stencil material around the outside first, and then just brush that onto the edges of the image, just like that. And actually doing that, you'll find that you'll get a little bit of texture with the brush strokes, which when you're working on ribbon, I think that's just a really nice detail. So we have that stenciled in like so. So stencil number 8, we can start introducing the rusty nails. Now again, this can be used as either as a brown or an orangey sort of a russety sort of colour, which is what I'm going for here. And I want to really go quite bold with this onto the bow. So this is what's going to set the bow aside from being a very different shade to the rest of the pumpkins, and hopefully make it stand out. So I'm putting the rusty nails into the bow. So this is going to be a really nice, intense, russety sort of colour, really autumny type of colour. And because I'm using this colour on the rest of the details of the stencil as well, it really won't look out of place. Of course, you could have gone for yellow, you could go for red, depending if you was doing white pumpkins, purpley pumpkins as well. This could even be like purple colour, couldn't it? So that look really lovely. So I'm concentrating a lot of ink on the centre of the bow and just trying to blend that out into the loops of the bow, so we've got a bit of shading going on. And then I can just work around the outside here. We've got details where we're going to add some branches that berries will be sitting on in a bit, so I can go really dark into those areas with the rusty nails as well. Now there is another colour, obviously, there's a tree bark ink, which would work just as well, I think. Right, you've noticed I've got two areas in the centre there that I haven't stenciled, and those will be sitting in the centre of the sunflowers. I will continue to use the rusty nails, but I don't want to put a fresh amount of ink on there. I just want to use what is left sitting on my brush. So I'm going to very gently just work what's left on my brush into the centre of those sunflowers. And when I take that stencil away, you'll see how that works really nicely. And that bow really does look very different to the rest of the pumpkin areas that we have there. So come on to stencil number 9, and we have the berries. Now this is where I'm going to use the Loganberry. You could use any of the other pinks. I wanted to use Loganberry purely because I haven't used it before. And it's from release number 3. It looked a gorgeous deep sort of damson-y colour. It's a real lovely berry colour, to be honest. So I'm really glad I used that one. But obviously if you don't have this, then any of the pinks or reds would work just as well. So I'm coming in as heavy as it will go, so they really stand out. And this just pop of pink will just look amazing against the rest of the colours that we have on there, and just really warm up what we've stenciled. So that looks really nice. What I will do to add a little bit more shade into the bow, just give that a little bit more dimension, I'm going to come back into stencil number 8, and while I've got my pink stencil brush in my hand, I'm actually going to work a bit of pink into this bow. Now it's not going to turn the bow pink, but it is going to darken and just give some shadow and some shading to the areas of the bow. Now if you're going to do this, you might as well do it with a colour that you've used in the rest of the image, just to make it all tie in and coordinate. So I'm really working on the centre area of the bow, and I'm going to work down into the tails there where there would be a little bit of folding. Lisa's given us some clues as to where that shading might be because we've got the creases. So I'm going to work the pink into that. Now you possibly wouldn't have thought of layering a pink ink over an orangey brown, but you're not looking to turn the bow pink, you are just looking to give it a little bit of shade and perhaps just a slight hint of a pink undertone, and this works really, really well. So I'm just working a little bit of ink into the sides here, because this area of the bow would be sitting behind and therefore have a little bit of shadow, as would the base of the bow under there. And I'll just add a little bit to the tips here, just for a little bit of shading. Excuse my hand, try and do this without covering up, so I'm going to add a little bit under the area there. Okay. When I take that away, you'll just see the effect that that has had. It's just really brought that bow to life, but it doesn't look out of place by being really bright and pink. So that's the image stenciled out of the way for you. So I will die cut and emboss this now, because again it's just so so lovely when you emboss these images that you think you've done well, you do a great job when you stencil them, but then it's amazing what extra detail the embossing folder actually adds as well. So you can see there, let me just bring it up to the camera now so you can see that. Look at the detail sitting there. So now let me just bring this in. This is the card that we want to try and recreate now. So I've used a DL card blank. I've cut myself an aperture using the smaller die from this set here. I used the larger die with the outside die to die cut a frame, and used one of the smaller apertures just to create an aperture in there, so the apertures fit together like that. This piece will sit on the inside of the card like so. So let's start creating that now. I'll show you in a second how we create this effect with the inks and the colours. If you don't have the inks, if you don't want to create the colours in this way, then obviously you can use paper or any of Lisa's cardstocks. So I'm just going to add the aperture there. So I'm going to make sure these apertures really line up. So before the glue dries and sets, I'm just going to make sure that that aperture lines up with that cardstock on the inside. So that's the internal part of the card we have going on. So I die cut the frame, but I've also used this larger outside die with the circles on to die cut a piece of acetate as well. I haven't gutted this one, but I am going to emboss this, and you can see from this piece already that I've already half embossed that. Now these embossing folders are 6 by 6 inches, and obviously I'm working on a DL sized piece of acetate, but so you can pattern match. This is what I wanted to show you, especially when you have such a regular and uniform pattern like this. It's so much easier to pattern match. So we have a section of the acetate here that isn't embossed, so all we need to do, this is where I would have embossed the first section. So all we need to do is just pattern match, and we need to just match up where we've already embossed to the pattern that is sitting on the embossing folder. And when you close that down, make sure you hold that well into place, and we can run that through the embossing folder, the die cutting machine. Now I've turned this around so the hinges of the embossing folder are on this side. That is fine so long as you don't put these on the forefront of your cutting plates. So I use a Sizzix Big Shot, so I use just one of my cutting plates. Obviously I can't put it on that way because this sticks out too much and won't fit through, so I need to turn it, but I have the hinges here. So as long as you sit the embossing folder towards the back of the cutting plates, you're not going to force that through, and therefore the hinges of the embossing folder won't be damaged. So you can see now that the pattern has matched perfectly all the way across. If you find that it doesn't, and there is a slight little area that you notice that hasn't worked quite well, it might be worth doing that, but making sure that that area that would perhaps, that you can see, I can almost guarantee that nobody else would see it, but if you can see it, then try and make sure you put it in a position where your embellishment is going to cover it. So what I'm going to do now, I've actually kept the protective sheet on the acetate. I do that while I'm embossing just to make sure I don't get too many fingerprints and I don't mark it too much. So now that I can peel that away, you can actually see the beautiful acetate and just how clear that is, and how lovely that sits. So it's a really subtle detail, but I think it's enough. Obviously, if you don't have the acetate, you can emboss this, the weave onto a piece of white cardstock, creams cardstock, or whatever fits your colour scheme. So I'm just going to attach this now. Now the reason, or a really good way to attach your acetate is in between a frame. So you're creating a sandwich, and it's much the same way as you would create a sandwich when you're trying to attach vellum to your cardstock. You want to hide the adhesive So I've just attached the frame to the acetate there. Now obviously if I turn that over you are going to see the adhesive, but that's why this is where the sandwich sort of comes in, and I can then put this onto the front of the card blank here, and that will hide all the adhesive. So you don't need to worry about that. So just take a moment or two just to line up those acetates. Make sure you put your glue on straight, not like me, because I'm rushing. Now, because you're adding, right, now let's take the minute to line that up. Let's paste, Claire. We can actually get, there we are. Now, it may just take a minute or two for the acetate and the cardstock to take to each other with the glue. It will, but just take perhaps an extra second or two just to hold that down, just to make sure that really does take. As I say, it does, but sometimes some things just need just that little extra security beforehand. So there we are. We have our aperture with the acetate window, and now we can attach our pumpkins to the front there, or to the side, or in the centre. Again, this can be entirely up to you. I think that works really nicely there. And then we can put our sentiment on the inside. Now you could, if you wanted, put it on the outside there, but again you have that issue of trying to hide the adhesive on the inside. So I think it is really nice just to take advantage that you've added that window onto your card blank, and you can attach your sentiment there. Now these sentiments are taken from this set here, the Happy Perfect You. So we have a whole host of stamps and the dies. The stamps are a really nice size, and I'm just going to take the birthday stamp, so I can stamp Happy Birthday to, and then we've got the U that we've die cut as well. Take the plunge, and I'm just going to stamp that straight onto my background. That's something that I'm quite happy to do, but obviously you can stamp this onto a piece of cardstock, die cut it out and then stick it in, or use any one of Lisa's stickers, wordage stickers. They would all work perfectly as well. So I'm not going to stick that in, I'm just going to have that there. I can stamp my sentiment. And if I close that over and add my pumpkins there, then you have a beautiful card, which say is all colour toned. Now what I will go and do now, I'll show you how I created the coloured background. Really simple to do. You just use your favourite colours, well, the colours that you've used on your die cut. That keeps everything coordinated perfectly. You can just use one colour, two colours, entirely up to you. It's just a case of just sort of playing. It's something that Lisa's shown you in the past as well. So your larger blending brushes are really good for this, because they put down a lot of ink onto the cardstock really quickly. So obviously to create the DL one you'd work on a large piece of cardstock, but this will show you exactly the same technique. So you just put random colours down. Now it's one of those things that you would really sort of have to get comfortable doing, because when you do it initially, your colour choices may look a bit random and it just looks very odd on a page. But when you actually die cut it to create the frame, it looks completely different. So go with it. Have the confidence in what you're doing. It really does come together. So I'm just putting a selection of the colours that I've used in my die cut, in my stenciled image onto the page. Now I'm making sure that around the outside of the cardstock is really covered, because if we were to cut the frame for this, then obviously you need that to contain all the colour. But I find when you make these backgrounds, just do it randomly, leave it for a day or two, then come back to it, because when you come back and look at it with different eyes on a different day, it looks so much better than on the day that you actually create. Because I think when you try and do something randomly like this, you overanalyze, you overthink it, and you think, oh, should I add a bit more colour? Do I like this? Do I not? Has it worked? And you can just really overthink it. But the key is not to. So if you imagine if you die cut that, this is how you end up with a frame that looks perfect. So what I'll do now, I'll bring this card in and I'll just show you how I just create that ombre effect. So I'm working with the straw hat and the burnt ochre. I shall go on with the darker colour first, and I shall pick up a lot of ink. We want to create a real dense colour on the base of this. So I'll pick up a lot of ink and I'm going to just keep on working that onto the base of this die cut. Now this is a really juicy ink pad because I've not used this one too often before, but you can see just how quick using the Wonder brushes and really being generous with the amount of ink that you put onto your brush, you can really start laying down the colour onto this perfectly. Now you can do this ombre effect with up to 3-5 colours, but I'm only using 2 colours on this. I don't think we need any more. Because I'm only using 2 colours, I want to coat half of this cardstock with this first colour. You may want to keep yourself a piece of copy paper just to sort of protect your fingers, because it can get a little bit messy. So you've got a really nice colour going on there. So I'm going to turn that around. I'm just going to wipe that ink off of there, because then I want to work on the lighter colour next with the straw hat. So I'll do exactly the same again. This is where you might want your copy paper just to protect your fingers. So we pick up as much ink as we can onto our brush and just carry on working that onto the cardstock until that's coated. It may seem that when you're doing this with the lighter colours that it takes a little bit longer to coat the card, but you'll get there. It doesn't take too long at all. You can see that coming along just nicely. So what you want to do is come down to meet the colour that you've already added. So I'm being really generous with the ink this time around. So I've almost met that darker colour. I don't want to go down into the darker colour with a lighter brush because that can contaminate it, but it doesn't matter if you work with the darker brush into the light, obviously that works a lot better. So I can just turn this round again. We need to soften this harsh line in the middle. So before I pick up any more ink, and just work with what I have on the brush, with the darker brush. So this is the burnt ochre brush, and I'm just going to work up into the lighter area there. Now I will pick up a little bit more ink, perhaps not as much as I picked up before, and just start softening that line, and just gently work that ink into that lighter area. And the more that you come into the lighter area, the less pressure you put on, so it's actually starting to become really a gradual line. Now at this stage I will come in and just work that paler line with the lighter brush. There's far less of the darker ink here to contaminate the lighter brush, so I'm not too worried about that. And you just work that brush into that, and that just softens the line. And you just carry on working backwards and forwards like that until you've got that really nice blend. So again, using, move my brushes aside, using this this die set that we have, I've used the cream cardstock to cut the lattice frame, and that will sit over the top of what I've just inked there. And this lattice frame is exactly the same size as the smallest die there. So you can see that by the time you put that lattice over the top of that, your inking, it immediately transforms it into something that looks like a piece of design paper that has been printed. So I wouldn't worry too much about any imperfections. Say by the time you've put something over the top of that, it really does, it transforms it. It makes it look very different. So I'm going to mat and layer that onto the die, the stitch die that is also in the set, onto a brown, so it's a nice coordinating, real rustic colour, real russety colour. And the creams and the browns just look so lovely together, don't they? Okay, so we have that sitting there. Now, as I said before, I've actually embossed the front of my card blanks, and I've just taken one of these slimline embossing folders. Now you will possibly need to have an A4 die cutting machine to do this, just to fit the width on the card, because when you emboss this, obviously you need to have the card not folded. You'd need to put your embossing folder on one side of your card blank like so, and then run that through your die cutting machine. Obviously you can't fold that over. If you don't have a large die cutting machine, then obviously you can cut yourself a piece of cardstock same size as the front of your card blank, emboss that, and then you can stick that on. So now I can layer my panel to the front. Again, I've used the same sentiment collection to die cut the sentiment there. This time instead I've actually used the 2 layers that die cut the words. Each of these words comes with 3 layers. I haven't used all 3. I've used a single die cut for this card here, and I've used the double die cuts for this one here to sit on there, and I've just used a sticker from one of Lisa's wordage sheets, the foiled stickers, and just cut that down so I can put that onto the front of the card. And now I can actually add my pumpkins there, so that now brings the whole card together with all of the colours. So now you can see we have 2 cards with the same products, actually entirely the same, bar the embossing folder in the back of this one, and we've got to use a different embossing folder here, but we've basically created 2 very different cards with 2 main collections, and really, really beautiful colours. I really love how those colours go together. So it's really nice to explore and go back to a lot of Lisa's earlier products and actually use them with the inks, because say when a lot of these products were released, the inks didn't exist. So it's really nice to see them all come together and see them work together so well. How did I stick the pumpkin on without the glue showing on here? This is the card that I've done now. The card will sit on the side. All I done, I actually glued along the frame. I glued along the frame, glued along the frame here, and just along the frame up here. So when I turn that over, or you can't see any glue on the inside, so I've actually used the frame. And the advantage of this is that I checked before I die cut it all that this image was actually the same width as the frame that I cut, so I knew that I could do that. If you were going to struggle with that, what you could do, actually, you could die cut yourself another piece of the pumpkins. You can either keep it blank or you can stencil and emboss it if you want, but if you wanted, you could always add that onto the inside of the card, and that would hide any workings as well. Now if you wanted to keep that blank, then that's fine, you could emboss it. That's entirely up to you, but it would give you that chance just to hide all the workings. If you perhaps wanted to put this on with 3D foam, then obviously the 3D foam would be very visible from this side, wouldn't it? Whether you're using acetate or whether you're using vellum, because I think the vellum would work really, really well for this as well, especially if you embossed it. But die cut yourself with just a blank one, and just put that there, and that would hide all the workings. And then you're free to add the adhesive and as many foam pads as you like. Go to town, because you wouldn't be able to see them. And I think that would work really well. Thanks so much for joining me this week. I shall see you again next week. Enjoy the rest of your week, everyone. Take care and see you soon.